Welcome back to Do More with Your Money. On today's episode, I am joined by Adam Carroll. Adam has published 4 books, produced an award winning documentary on student loan debt, has a TED Talk with over 5 million views, and helps people achieve true financial freedom in their lives. More than financial freedom, Adam is all about helping people achieve time freedom, relationship freedom, and service freedom. Adam, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
TJ, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm excited to see where this goes.
Me too. You have a lot of great topics that I think we're going to have a great conversation over. Before we get into those, I always just like to start a little bit about your why, how you got to where you are today, and just learning a little bit
Yeah.
about your story.
Yeah, cool. Well, I appreciate the ask. I graduated from college a debt statistic. So I had 30 several thousand dollars in student loans. I had $8,000 in credit card debt. I was upside down on my car. I'd lived like a rich college kid all the way through college. Didn't really know it was what I was doing, but money was easy and free flowing in the form of student loans and credit card debt. And I once I graduated, I kind of realized the error of my ways. And candidly, I met a woman my senior year in college who said, "Get rid of your debt or I'm going to get rid of you." And I was like, "Whoa, that's harsh. I don't even know you yet that well." And we just earlier this week celebrated our 24th wedding anniversary. So it was clearly meant to be. But I think my purpose, the core why for me, TJ, is that I've seen people struggle financially, and it just drives me crazy that there are very simple things we can do from a behavior standpoint that will set us up for financial success. But most people are never really taught that. And so what I always wanted to do was, how do I simplify talking about money and the concepts around money so that people really grasp it, and it's not this like pie in the sky, hard to understand concept. So for me, it's really about like the aha moment that I see in people's faces and eyes when we chat about this stuff.
No, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. And I love that. I mean, ultimately, I mean, you've been doing this for a long time and had a lot of success in different realms. So I'm sure you have a lot of optionality within your life. So it's always good to hear about, the why you still choose to spread the information that you've, attained over years. So basically, yeah, the first thing I would like to hear about is, talking about this shred method. You say that, you paid off your home in record time, saving over 180,000 in interest in the process. I'd love to
Yeah.
hear a little bit about the shred method, what it is, how people can start to think about repaying debt.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the story's kind of evolved a little bit, even since paying the house off the first time. I don't say this to boast or brag or be a big shot. People can think what they think about it, but I have owned this home that I'm in now for about 14 years. And when my wife and I moved in, I wasn't really sure. We knew that this is the house we wanted to be in for an extended period of time. Thought maybe we would level up or move to a different neighborhood or something as our kids were going through high school and deciding on colleges. But in the 14 years that we've owned this home, I have paid the house off 3 times. And people will be like, "What? Why on earth would you do that?" And effectively, what I started wondering was, um, I was looking really intently at my mortgage statement, TJ, and I had read, I don't remember which book it was, but I think it was a book called Debt Free and Prosperous Living by a guy named John Commuta. And John mentioned in the book that there are two big expenses that we have in life, bigger than almost everything else. And we'll spend sometimes between 40 and 60% of our life paying for these two expenses. And the two expenses, number one is taxes, and the other one is the interest expense on debt.
Hmm.
And so in reading this book, and I found a lot of advisors in the tax world and just in the area of financial literacy. And what I got over and over again from people was, if you can minimize your taxes, which we do through business and owning real estate and those kinds of things, and then you focus on how do you minimize the interest expense on debt, then financial freedom and financial security is a given because you're eliminating two of the biggest expenses anyone will ever have. And so the shred method at its core is it's a cash flow technique and a piece of software that drives that technique. Um, but we help people blast away their largest expense, which is the interest expense on debt, usually mortgages, student loans, and investment properties or vehicles are the other categories.
That's interesting, and, the debt pay down versus invest is kinda like an age-old
Yeah,
debate, especially, there's a lot of different, influencers, right, around, these topics, and so I'd
totally.
love to hear your thoughts, so, is there ever a time where it doesn't necessarily make sense to focus on paying down debt, like, especially in I don't know, if you have a low interest rate on your mortgage, things like that? Like,
Yeah.
is that or is it more the behavioral component of paying down debt?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's funny, I just had this combo with a client the other day, and we were going through this, "Well, what if my mortgage is at 3% and my other, vehicles that we would be using for shred are at 7 or 8%? What does that make a difference?" And the reality is that when you start digging into the numbers, it may not be, this may not be something that we're gonna engage in for an extended period of time. But what happens, TJ, when we use the shred method for even 12 to 18 months or 24 months, you can literally alter your family's financial future for the rest of forever. And the reason for that is the lion's share of the interest on your mortgage, even if it's at 3%, the lion's share of what you're paying is paid in the first 3 to 5 years.
Right.
So if we are going hard to the hoop at our mortgage to help pay that down in the first 24 months, let's say, we likely will offset hundreds of thousands of dollars that we would have normally paid in interest to our banker. And so what I like to ask folks is if you look at your mortgage statement and you see what your payment is and you see how much is going to interest and how much is going to principal.
Mhm.
And if you're not a little bit shocked by how much is going to interest, then you're probably far enough into your mortgage that it doesn't really matter. But if you look at your mortgage statement and you're like, we send how much in interest every single month? Then the shred method, if even again for 12, 18, 24 months, can make this massive difference in your family's finances. And when my wife and I really started leveraging this hardcore, the one kind of mindset, I guess, or philosophy we were running on, TJ, was if you do for 2 years what most people won't do, you can do for the rest of your life what most people can't do.
Mm.
And what most people won't do for 2 years is stay focused on one goal and just go after it like it's their job, right? I mean, if in the FIRE movement, the financially independent retire early movement, if you said to someone, "Hey, if you save 50% of your income for 5 years, you'll likely be able to retire 20 years early," or whatever.
Yeah.
Would someone really go after that and do it? If they realize the difference it could make, they probably would. The same is true on the mortgage side of things. So, when faced with the question of does it make sense to shred or invest, what I like to say is it's not an either or, it's a bit of a both and. And we just help strategize how much should we be applying towards shredding and how much should we be applying towards, ongoing investing and building wealth.
No, that's interesting. I mean, it is a hard question, and I come up against it a lot. I mean, in the clients that I serve, a lot of times, even homeownership is not necessarily even attainable to them.
Right.
And so, even to be in a house, I mean, if you've had an existing mortgage, that's kind of a luxury of its own. I mean,
Totally.
not to go on a total side tangent, but I would love to hear, do do you think there's ways to build wealth, efficiently without necessarily purchasing, a primary residence.
Yeah. I definitely think there is. Um, and I think some of this is like I love simple concepts when I talk about money, and I'm sure you do too. It's the easiest way um, to communicate, our goals, our mission, our values around money is in a very, very simplistic way. And so I got this piece of advice years ago, and it's just served me well, that the single greatest way to build wealth is to create a spread between what you make and what you spend for as long as humanly possible. So if someone's not going to buy a home, they're going to be a renter for a period of time. The key to that working is you're not going and renting the penthouse apartment in the nicest neighborhood. If you're going to build wealth as a renter, keep your rent relatively low in relation to your income, your expenses relatively low in relation to your income, and invest the heck out of whatever you have left over.
Right.
But we have to have money left over. And so, even those that would be more amenable to renting right now, but have fairly significant student loan debt, as an example,
Yeah.
they could apply SHRED and the principles behind SHRED to drastically reduce or eliminate student loan debt, which then would, by the end, free up enough discretionary income that maybe then they can go look at buying a home or buying a rental property.
Right.
Um, the one thing I will say in relation to your question is I've not met someone who has really vast amounts of wealth that doesn't at least own some property, because of the multiple avenues of generating wealth or of building net worth through property ownership, whether that be, you know, uh, building equity and paying down debt, appreciation of the property, renting it out to create cash flow, whatever it may be. It's still a really great source of building wealth over time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, I just like asked that question because, like I said, the affordability right now, when I run the numbers, right, even at 7%, like for example,
Yep,
at 7% interest rate, you could
totally,
rent for, in some cases, like $10,000 a month if you're in a major city, and actually on those early years, like you said, with the amortization schedule, pay
yep,
less in rent than you would in interest.
totally, totally,
But if you, let's say, okay, let's say you do take that step, that leap, and you do think you're gonna have a long holding period, and
yep.
especially in today's interest rate environment, right? You're paying a lot of upfront interest on that mortgage. Talk to me about some of the principles, how you would address that with somebody via the shred method. And also, I see that you've mentioned, potentially using like home equity lines of credit as maybe there's appreciation in the property. How does that also factor into these
Yeah.
principles?
Yeah, yeah, great questions. So the underlying principle around SHRED is, again, that the majority of our interest is paid on the front end of our mortgage. So the way that I often describe this, TJ, just from a visual perspective, is you know what an amortization curve looks like, right? On a 30-year fixed mortgage.
Yeah.
If you were to set a traffic signal over that amortization curve, the first 10 years of your mortgage are red light, second 10 years, yellow light, third 10 years are green light. And what I mean by that is in the first 10 years, the majority of your money is going to interest. It's not going to principal. Sort of like renting, right? We're just paying interest on the debt. Second 10 years are yellow light, some going to interest, some going to principal. And the last 10 years are green light. In fact, it's year 21 of a 30-year fixed mortgage that most people have paid off half of their mortgage balance. And then the other half happens in the last 9 years, meaning the majority of the money is going to principal. So knowing that, the shred method, what it does is we are going to make the whole thing, or as much of it as possible, green light, where a majority of our funds are going towards principal pay down. And it does two things. Number one is it expands the amount of equity we have in our property right off the bat. Number two, as you expand the amount of equity in your property, we equate equity with liquidity. So if somebody's got $200,000 in equity in their home and they have a $50,000 home equity line of credit available to them, well, that's 50 grand in liquidity that could be used for a rental property. It could be used for, overfunding cash value life insurance. It could be put in a syndication. It could be used to start a business. We don't want to do anything risky necessarily with it. We want to take calculated risks, but it's there. It's a liquidity pool that
Mm,
most people wouldn't have otherwise. The line of credit itself is really nothing more than a tool that we all have available to us. Um, whether that's a home equity line of credit if you're a homeowner, a personal line of credit if you don't own a home, you're a renter, or a business line of credit if you're a business owner. But that line of credit is simply a cash flow tool. So with Shred, money is deposited into the line of credit, and the software that drives the behavior for us in Shred is based on a complex algorithm that says, hey, it looks like you have income coming in on this date. 3 days before, send this big lump sum over to your largest balance, whether it's a mortgage, student loans, what have you.
mhm.
We're going to send this big lump sum over, begin reducing the principal balance. And oh, by the way, 3 days later, your income drops into that line of credit account and pays it back down to zero or close to zero. So we're in effect borrowing our own income in really short bursts, paying a fraction of interest on it.
Mhm.
And what we're doing with that money is we're offsetting thousands, in some cases, tens of thousands of dollars in interest on the mortgage, the student loan, the business loan, whatever it may be.
That's interesting. So, if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that as you're building equity in the property, you're able to tap into that equity to pay down debt at an accelerated rate, which is saving you
That's
interest,
correct.
even though you're paying interest on the home equity line of
You
credit.
got it. Because the mortgage itself might be at 3%, the line of
Hmm.
credit might be at 8%, but 3% on for raw numbers, 3% on $1,000,000 is a lot of money every single month. Whereas
Right.
8% on $5,000 for 3 days is a fraction. So imagine and this, from a like an analogy standpoint, if I said, "I'll loan you $100, it'll cost you $5 in simple interest to borrow it from me. But if you apply it the right way, it'll save you $2,000 long term." Would you take that deal?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we just do that day after day after day, week after week, month after month. And over the course of 24 months, for most people, and again, one of the things that's a little bit of a disclaimer here for your audience is you do have to have discretionary income. There has to be more
Right.
money at the end of the month. You can't have more month at the end of your money. That just doesn't work.
Yeah.
But if there's more money at the end of the month and we're leveraging it the right way, you can radically reduce the amount of interest that you pay on your mortgage, increase the amount of equity, and free up that liquidity that you then get to choose how to use.
No, that's very interesting. I never thought about it that way. And that's really, again, because you're paying them, even though the interest rate could be low, you're still paying the majority of the interest up front because of that amortization schedule.
Correct.
So again, you mentioned later in the amortization schedule, at what point would you maybe not be doing the same strategy? Like, would you stop doing that?
Yeah, great question. So, the way that we look at interest and how we describe this to shredders is there is an interest to income ratio that we have to look at. And I'll give you a great example. We had a case study the other day. Young guy, new homeowner, just got a raise up to 100 grand. So he's making $100,000 a year. And he was like, "I'm so excited. I'm making six figures." And then we started digging into his numbers. There were student loans. He had his mortgage. He had a car loan. He had a little bit of credit card debt, not a ton, but a few thousand, 3,000, $4,000. And as we started going back and doing the math on it, so he makes 100, he's in, let's say, a 30 or 35% tax bracket. So he takes home 65, let's say 70. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He's taking home 70. In interest alone on the debts that he had accrued, he was paying nearly $40,000 a year in interest. So we're at 70, we subtract 40 grand in interest. There's 30 grand left over for this young gun making six figures to live on, which is not nothing. It's 2,500 a month. But, if we're talking about travel and
Yeah,
going out to
not
eat,
much.
it's not much. And so that is the interest to income ratio. So he's like, "Well, what point do I stop doing this? If I'm shredding now, when do I begin to back off?" And the reality is we start looking at how much interest are we paying in our mortgage payment? And can we get to a point where 50% or more of our payments going towards principal? And if we can accelerate the amortization table to a point where 50% or more is going to principal, we have a couple options. We can either say, "Cool, I'm good with my payment. Now I'm just going to let it ride and I'm going to start investing really heavily with the extra money that I have." Or one of the strategies we employ is we'll teach people how to recast their mortgage.
Okay.
So if you started with a $500,000 mortgage at 7%, and through Shred, we get it down to 250 or 200, let's say, within 2 or 3 years. If you owe 200 and you have 27 years left at 7%, that's a significantly smaller payment. And mortgage companies out there are willing to recast mortgages all day long. Wells Fargo will do it on one phone call. And so what we do is if we can help someone get into a home, if they can afford the payment, have a little bit extra every month, let's shred it, get it to a point where we can recast the mortgage payment. And now you have even more discretionary income every month that you could either use to go into investments or to continue shredding and get the thing even lower.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I haven't necessarily thought through entirely. I guess how would you approach then, like just the general like someone considering like a 30-year, fixed rate mortgage versus just a 15-year, right? To
Yep.
kind of automatically accelerate that principal
Yep.
repayment with less flexibility, I guess. How
It,
do you
it,
think about that?
this is a great question because we see the scenario all the time where someone has said, I got this 15-year fixed. The payment's killing me. It's way, I thought I could swing it, but then life happened, circumstances happen. I need more money and my payment's eating me alive. The reason we really like 30-year fixed mortgages is we can keep the payment relatively low. And when the payment's lower, we have the freedom and flexibility to use that discretionary income, the free cash flow, if you will,
Mhm.
in any way, shape, or form we want. So I'm a big fan of 30-year fixed mortgages. I understand why we would do 15 or 10, but the challenge with that is we don't know what's going to happen in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, particularly if you're a W 2 wage earner. I mean, I have friends that work for large Fortune 100 companies that are now saying, one case study in particular, a friend of mine, the company he works for made $7 billion in profit last year, but their stock has suffered and they're gonna have a round of layoffs to improve their stock, their stock price. um, that kind of stuff happens. It's out there.
Right.
And if you're stuck in a 15-year fixed and you don't have 6 or 12 months worth of living expenses in the bank, you could be, uh,
In big
could be
trouble,
in a
yeah.
world of hurt. Yeah.
No, for sure, that makes a lot of sense. So talk to me a little bit then about how do people go about, like, minimizing their expenses to, maximize this system? Like, what are some tactics and strategies that you're using?
Yeah. So, one of the very first conversations we have, TJ, is people come to us and they say, I'm not sure I have as much discretionary income as I probably should have. And one of the things that we do with Shred is in going through some of the spending. Our goal isn't necessarily to put anybody on a beans and rice diet. I mean, I'm not a fan of it. I don't like it. I like steak and bottles of wine personally. So I've never been a fan. However, I think most people are very unconscious with their spending. So just as an example, if you had what we would call quote unquote extra in your checking account, what might you be prone to do with it?
Assuming I had a fully funded cash reserve, I would just be investing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about any one of your clients or a normal consumer? If they had extra, what would they do with it?
It depends on what their debt, looked like.
Yep.
They might be making accelerated payments on their mortgage or paying down debt, but usually we like to automate their planned savings ahead of time so they'd already kind of be investing any excess cash flow.
Yep. Love that. The answer that I hear quite often is they'll say, well, if I have extra, it makes me feel good and confident, and then I'll probably spend it.
Right,
Because
right.
if there's any in our checking account, right, it's like, yeah, we'll stop for dinner, or I'll buy that pair of shoes or the new outfit while I'm out shopping at the mall or whatever, right? So with Shred, one of the things we do is bring everything to the very conscious level. We have people reprice insurances, car insurance, homeowners insurance. It's a kind of a checklist when we get people started. Go reprice what your cell phone plan is, call your or your home internet provider and see if there's an upgraded service that you can, that's there that you can downgrade to the one you're currently in and they'll charge you less for it. It's
Right,
amazing. These services, they get faster and better and cheaper, but the companies that provide them will never change our payment. Like if we're
right.
locked in, we're locked in, right? So we have to be mindful about calling and making those changes from time to time. Um, the other piece of this that, from a how do we reduce our expenses
Yeah.
is imagine someone they go and buy a $30,000 vehicle, and a $30,000 vehicle purchase would probably look like a 5 or 7 year loan. It might be somewhere between 4.9 and 6.9%, but it's going to carry with it probably a six, seven, $800 a month payment, right?
Right. Yeah.
And with Shred, what we do once we've kind of gone through the initial phase where we've like either blasted away credit card debt, maybe we've taken care of some student loans. Ideally, we go after car loans because that's typically the second largest share of a cash flow plan is your car payment. So if we get rid of that and we're shredding for a little bit, let's say it's 12 months or 18 months, and it's time to get a new car again, what we've done and encourage users to do is we're going to stroke a check straight out of the HELOC. for the for the car.
Mm,
And what it does, if $30,000 is the car loan, and let's say the HELOC is at 8%, well, that's $200 a month in interest that we're paying on that car, right? In a very raw, like simplified sense. But what happens is because our income is cycling through that HELOC, we're actually not paying $200 a month in interest. It's just sequentially going lower and lower and lower every single month. And the software that powers this is tracking what's the balance, what's the interest rate, and how fast is the payoff happening. And in the end, what happens is you're not locked into a six or seven or $800 a month payment. You're just paying interest if you want to. But because our income is cycling through and the HELOC balance is going down over time,
mm.
the car ends up costing significantly less interest wise, and we have it paid off in no time.
That's interesting. I think I need to circle back on the HELOC in general because maybe I'm not fully understanding it. So when you're taking a HELOC in general, right? There's
Mhm.
an interest rate, right, to access the capital in your home.
Mhm.
Now that interest is going directly to the loan provider, correct? 100% of that interest.
Correct.
Okay. And so, but you're saying that since, obviously it takes like, if you have an 8% rate, it's going to take a year to pay 8% on the balance that you've withdrawn.
That's right.
And you're saying that, so in this case, like if we need to make a vehicle purchase, instead of doing a personal loan at whatever it is, 5, 6, 7%, we can take the HELOC. Why is that less interest overall than if you were to take that personal loan over the 5 years?
Yeah. The reason being is that the HELOC itself is a simple interest vehicle.
Mm,
So in a simple interest scenario, you're charged interest based on the average daily balance of that account.
got you.
So on day one, it might be 30,000 because we just pulled it out, right?
Yes.
But 5, 7 days, 10 days later, you might have a paycheck dropping in. And let's say your paycheck is 5 grand. So
Mm,
5 grand dumps into the HELOC, brings the balance down to 25,000. Over the next 2 or 3 days, maybe we spend another 2,000 in expenses that we're using. It's just like groceries and utility bill and cell phone and all those kinds of things. So that goes on that HELOC. But then a few days later, another check comes in, 5 grand more. Now it's 22,000. Well, over the course of that month, the average daily balance might have hovered around 24 grand, let's say 20, 24, 25,000. And so 25,000 at 8% would be, if my math is right, 4 grand. All right. 10, 2,500.
yeah, about that. Yeah.
So if we were to, it'd be less than that actually. 2,000, excuse me, 2,000. So that would mean that on a month by month basis, that first month you would pay roughly about $183 in interest on month one.
Right.
Month two comes along and you can see what's happened. We went from 30 to 25 up to 27 down to 22. It's going to keep doing that all the way down. And the interest amount was 183 in month one. It might be 155 or 160 in month two. It'll be 140 in month three. And then it just sequentially goes down from there because of the amount of cash that's cycling through the system.
So the real kind of, I guess, I forget what the word I'm looking for here is, but like basically you're optimizing because it's the amortization. And with a vehicle loan, it's also an amortization schedule,
Correct.
correct? Versus
Correct.
simple interest, which is just based on, it's the simple interest that you said. So you're just paying a percentage of whatever you borrow. And so
That's
there's an
right.
opportunity there, like an arbitrage opportunity, I guess is the word I'm looking for
That's
here.
exactly what it is. That's
Okay.
exactly what it is. And people's eyes roll back a little bit whenever finance people talk about arbitrage and amortization tables and all that. But we really are creating like super simple arbitrage, interest rate arbitrage.
Right.
And when done sequentially month after month, your savings is massive.
That's really interesting. And this is an area that I'm really happy we're talking about because I always want to, challenge my own beliefs. And, even like I said, because in my mind, right, if you have a very low interest rate on your mortgage, let's say it's a 3%, you were able to refinance during, pandemic times, whatever,
Yep.
if you did live out your mortgage over that 30 years, you are
Yep.
on average paying 3% interest,
Correct.
but it's just over the
Yep.
30 years.
Over 30 years, that's exactly right, and I think this is a really important point to make, TJ, to your audience,
Yeah.
is that when we sign that truth in lending disclosure, and it says your interest rate is 3%, or in this case today, it's probably 6.5%, let's say,
Yeah.
which 6.6 is the magic interest rate where you will double what you've borrowed in interest. So, if someone borrows 300K and then they look at their truth in lending disclosure, I mean, it's kind of an eye-popping number for most people. Like, okay, would you pay $700,000 for this $300,000 home you just bought? People
Right.
would be like, no way, but that's what you're going to do over the course of 30 years. With Shred, what happens is um, I can take a 3% mortgage rate, and by using Shred, we can create an effective APR of like uh, half a point to a point, like 0.5 to 1%.
Wow.
And the reason for that is because we're eliminating so much of the interest that would normally have been paid over that 30-year period. And instead, we're paying it off in 3 to 7 years at the high end.
Got you. No, that's interesting. That's a really important thing to understand, is that opportunity, and that's awesome. I like that a lot. So I guess talk to me then a little bit about, let's say, you have gotten to a point where you're at a point in that amortization schedule where you're comfortable with how much is going towards principal. What are the next steps beyond that? Like, how are people, what is your thoughts as far as, continuing to build wealth beyond that?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, the understanding that the equity in your home has no real rate of return. So, and this is one of the reasons that I think advisors would say, no, don't put money in your house because it doesn't, there's no return on the equity in your home. It's going to appreciate 3% or 5%, whether
Right.
you owe 95% or you owe 9%, right?
Sure.
So what we encourage people to do, once you get to a point where the majority of your payments go into principal, and at that point, you probably have a significant amount of equity, a good chunk in your home. Knowing that that has no real internal rate of return, through Shred, instead of us sending big lump sums to begin taking out more principal, instead, what we start doing is dropping those chunks either in the market. We might be dropping them into overfunded cash value life insurance policies, what some people call infinite banking. Um, it could go into other real estate deals. But ultimately, what we're going to do based on the individual and what their personal goals and ambitions are, we want to figure out where would that money best be suited as opposed to just sitting in equity in your home. So the reason advisors love what we do is you can take a family that's used to dollar cost averaging 500 or 750 bucks a month with an advisor, not an insignificant amount of money, not going to make them rich in 5 years, but in 30 years it's going to be decent, right? But what we can do is we can show them, if you do for 24 months, take some of those funds, apply it to Shred, get to a point where you're clawing back, 10 or $15,000 in interest that you would normally pay to your lender.
Hmm.
And now every year we can send an extra 5 or 10 grand to our advisor and say, put this in an aggressive fund somewhere that'll begin to grow rapidly for me. Um, that's the next step. That's phase two, if you will. So we like to describe what we do with Shred as phase one. Phase two is redeploying that equity in a very strategic way and putting it somewhere that's going to grow quickly. And then phase three is, and this again is, I think everyone should be doing it, but it's not for everybody, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's how do we build massive, passive, permanent streams of income? So in looking at money's going into the market, sure, but then are we investing in dividend paying stocks? Are we investing in real estate deals? Are we investing in anything that's cash flow producing? Because at some point, if we want to retire early, it can't all be qualified funds.
Sure.
You can't, if you want to retire at 50 and you can't really tap any of the other funds till you're 59 and a half, you got to have passive income that covers your expenses between when you quote unquote retire and when you have access to the big shiny bucket of money at the end of the rainbow.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, obviously, there are some ways to tap into that, but yeah, there's not a ton of flexibility from like a tax planning standpoint if all of your money is in pre-tax accounts. I do want to hear a little bit because now this is going to be a little like controversial, especially for like
Yeah.
the community that I'm in. But I would say advisors, that at least that I'm around in the fee only community, right? Where
Yeah.
maybe they are charging, an asset management fee or whatever, fee only in general. They don't
Yep.
tend to be fans of cash value life insurance and like
Yep.
the idea of infinite banking. But again, I'm open to learning new things and I don't want to have preconceived notions. So tell me a little bit about, you mentioned like who could that make sense for as far as funding these cash value policies and how to, creating the income stream, etc.
Yep.
I won't. I guess my philosophy generally has been like keeping insurance separate from investments. But
Yeah.
again, I would love to hear kind of how you approach that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate the opportunity even to talk about it because I know this is one of those where I think whole life has gotten a bit of a bad rap because of how it's sold and people don't, lack of understanding around it and those kinds of things.
Right now, it's also like the IULs, right? Is like a big,
Yeah.
and maybe that's what you're talking about. But that's the one where there's definitely a lot of, especially on LinkedIn, I'm seeing a lot of, talk about that. So.
Yeah. 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 I'll tell you why I like infinite banking, and maybe we'll start there. And then what kind of scenario would it work for? Um, the first and foremost, understanding that I like to have a long-term view of money. And I found that some of the most, successful and wealthy individuals in the world, they have a they have a 10 or 15 or 20 or 40 or 50-year outlook sometimes, right? So if you were to say, "Why are you putting money in that when you could make this percent?" I might be thinking about what life is gonna be like at 70 and
Mhm.
how I'm gonna contribute to my family in really meaningful ways as a result. Secondarily, I like to look at family history, and some members of my family had been in long-term care, and they were in nursing homes. And point blank, I don't want to end my days in a nursing home. I don't aspire to that at all, but it could happen. And that cost will continue to get more and more expensive. Assisted living, long-term care today is like, if you were to buy insurance, it would probably end up being, I don't know, 2 or $3,000 a month, but your costs are going to be more like 7 or 8, maybe 9, $10,000 a month to live in one of these units.
Mhm.
And what I really like about infinite banking is not only is it a store of cash, I can build cash value in these policies. I can borrow against it at some point for long-term care reasons, or if I'm incapacitated in any way, shape, or form, we can borrow against the death benefit for that very same purpose. So for me, the insurance policy itself is future oriented. Um, Secondarily on this, the there is a distinction that we would make, TJ, between available money and accessible money. So available money would be money sitting in a high yield savings account or a money market account. I could go to the bank or credit union, pull it out, count it, roll around in it, be excited that it's there. You know what I mean? That's available money. Maybe it's even money in our safe at home. Then there is accessible money. And accessible money to me is, what is the money I could access within 2 to 3 days, a week, maybe on the long end, that if either I see a great deal, I need access to funds for some reason, or, just flat out, I want to invest, or maybe even pay for college or take a trip. It's there, it's accessible. The infinite banking policies for me, that's what those become, is accessible buckets of money. So I'll pause there because you may have a question loaded.
Yeah, no, I think that all sounds like good to me. I guess where it like in your opinion, because it's obviously you're a guy who understands like maximizing the value of money, right? Like the arbitrage
Yeah.
opportunity with the amortization schedule and the simple interest. So where is the value coming from having a permanent insurance policy? Is there tax deferral that's providing that
Yeah.
benefit? I understand that there's borrowing section, but you can borrow off in a brokerage account. You can borrow, so where
Yep.
is, in your opinion, that extra value coming from? And do you have
Yeah.
to
Okay.
be in that highest tax bracket for it to make sense or, that kind of thing?
Yeah. I don't really think you do have to be in the highest tax bracket for it to make sense. You hit the nail on the head on the tax growth. I mean, money that is held in an infinite bank, we would call it a high equity cash value policy. The growth that occurs in there is tax free. And the reason it does is it is written as an insurance policy. It's not an investment. And you're probably familiar with the MEC limit,
Yes. Yep.
that anything above the MEC limit, which is a modified endowment contract, is not treated as insurance, it's treated as an investment, and therefore it's taxed differently. So if we are funding a policy and we're below or at the MEC limit,
Hmm.
we can put as much cash in there as we want, and it'll grow at somewhere between 5 and 5.5% every single year. And this is the key. It's I would say guaranteed. It's contractually obligated by the insurance company to pay a dividend and to pay interest on the money. So they're contractually obligated to pay interest on it. And then the dividend comes because it's typically a mutual company like Mass Mutual, Penn Mutual.
So it's
So
invested in securities, in stocks.
it is by
Okay.
the insurance company,
But
right?
you're getting a guaranteed rate of return.
You're getting a guaranteed rate of return. And this is the key, different than a brokerage account. If I had $150,000 in a policy in cash value, and I pulled 100 grand out to go invest in a real estate deal, the money that is taken out of that policy is a loan against the value of my policy itself. And so I'm still going to earn 5.5% on 150, but I'm going to take 100 out and put it in a real estate deal that might make me 10, 12, 14% per year.
Okay.
And I'm going to pay a little bit of interest on it. So when I borrow my own money, I might pay a 5% interest rate as an example. I still get a half a point arbitrage on it. But the advantage is when I borrow that money out, I don't have a payment to make on it if I don't want to.
Right.
So for me, the control of that account is amazing because you get to decide when, how, and if it's paid back. And in doing that, imagine having your own bank of funds that you get to choose how it's invested and how it's utilized. That's really the primary, the primary
What would you say is the
benefit.
biggest? Okay, that makes sense. What would you say is the biggest like trade off? I get, I guess, like in my opinion, like what would happen if you did decide you just needed to liquidate
Yeah.
the the?
There is and again, this is a great question because this sort of smacks in the face of having a long-term approach. What I would say to someone, if you are not convinced that doing an infinite banking policy is for you, don't even begin the process because the first 3 to 5 years, there is a cost to the insurance. Like
Mhm.
you're paying for the life insurance coverage. Post year 5, sometimes 6, sometimes 7, it depends on the policy and how it's written. But at one point in time, every dollar you've put in is available there in cash value. And from that point forward, it just grows. And
Because it
so the goal of that, just like a brokerage account, is we want to get to a point where there's compound interest velocity. Because once you hit that point, and you know how this is, once you get over a certain number, whether it's 100 grand, 200 grand, 500 grand, the compound interest starts taking over. And it's like, holy cow, this is amazing how fast this is growing. It'll do the same thing in the policy. Our goal is just to fund that, front load that as quickly as possible.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I'm always, like I said, I'm always interested in different avenues, and yeah, that's great. So, what would you say then? So, let's talk a little bit about. You mentioned the fire movement. You mentioned financial freedom. You know, first of all, what do you think of the fire movement in general?
Uh, you know, I think what do I think of the fire movement? I heard it described this way, and this is what I really appreciated. Somebody said, I don't like the idea of fire because retire early seems kind of like obsequious or something. Like it's so arbitrary. I'm going to retire early. Okay, so at 30 you're going to be done working, or 35. What are you going to do for the rest of your life? And this person that described it, she said, I like to define it as financially independent next endeavor. So
Mm,
she didn't say fire, she called it fine. I want to be fine. Financially independent next endeavor, meaning I got plenty of money coming in passively. Now I get to just decide what my next thing is. And I really like that idea. Um, I think we were doing fire candidly before it had become a thing. When my wife and I started doing shred in 2012 and we had our house paid off in 2015, we had already decided we were going to live on one income. We wanted to minimize our expenses and we wanted to maximize all the discretionary income as much as possible. I feel like that is central to fire. And so we were kind of living it, but we definitely weren't like making our own lemonade at restaurants with water and a lemon and sugar packets, like some of the fire folks do. So it for me, it's more about efficiency and making sure that our income is being used as efficiently as humanly possible.
No, that makes sense. I like that, the FINE movement. I'll keep that in mind. I like to also say, like, financial independence work optional, right? Like, it's more about just the optionality of kind of doing things that you want to do. It doesn't mean you're not going to work. It's just, choosing the things that you're going to do. And I
Yeah,
also am starting to notice a trend, and I'm also pushing clients a little bit to have that longer term mindset of like, hey,
yeah,
listen, you're going to have a long career and you're going to earn a substantial amount of money. As long as you're developing good habits, it's okay to use your money along the way, to
totally,
take breaks, right? Let's say you do get laid off and it's like, you know what? I'm just going to take the next 6 months off of this year. I have
totally.
resources banked up, right? So I agree with you that I think that a lot of people that think they want fire really just want to make a change in their life, and
Yeah,
and they're gonna find that even if they do achieve financial independence, that they're still gonna want to do something.
totally,
um,
totally. And I would, if I could add to that,
sure.
I think the piece that we try and insert into that equation is imagine for 2 years, 24 months, 36 months on the long end, you get to a point where you've blasted away a ton of your principal, you've recast for a really small mortgage, and 3 years into your job, you're like, "I kinda wanna go try my hand at being a yoga instructor," or whatever your thing is, right?
Yeah,
Knowing that it's not gonna pay a ton. Imagine the power of being able to switch to a different career and not being like, "I'll switch to it, but I have to make at least as much or more than I'm making now." Because 'Cause I've seen a lot of people in that boat where they're kinda hamstrung. It's like, I wanna move, but I'm making too much money and I can't leave this job because my life expenses have gotten so out of control that
for
I have to
sure.
maintain the lifestyle.
100%. Yeah, the golden handcuffs of whether it's like equity compensation or they've locked themselves into a expensive mortgage, right?
Yeah.
And then yeah, so awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I always leave the audience with one question, which is, or one tip. How can people do more with their money? Obviously, you've dropped a ton of knowledge today. It doesn't have to necessarily be on the building side, it could be on the spending side.
Yeah.
If you had to leave the audience with one tip,
Do I just get one, TJ?
you can give two, whatever works for you.
Um, well, first let me say that it's easier to make it than it is to keep it, and it's easier to keep it than it is to grow it. And someone told me one time that making it is easy, it just requires action. You just gotta go take action, you can make money. I could go mow lawns and make money, and the more action I take, the more I'd make, right? If I wanted to keep the money, it's a behavior change. So if your clients want to be investing more with you or being able to build more wealth, they have to actually have some behavior related change in order to do that. And if we're going to grow the money, then one of the things we have to do is we have to educate ourselves. And that means listening to podcasts like yours, reading books on money, going to conferences and conventions, just taking an active interest in how can we grow our money more. So make, keep, grow, and it's action, behavior, education. So that's tip number one. Tip number two, and I'll leave it at this, is that you mentioned, maybe you're out of a job, but you've got a stockpile of money, and it'd be a good time to take a vacation. I'm a big believer in Tim Ferriss's concepts in the 4 Hour Work Week around mini retirement. And 2 of the last 3 years, my family and I have taken a month off and just gone somewhere. And so we were in Italy in 2019. We were in Hawaii actually, it was over the last 4 years, I should say. So last year we were in Hawaii, and taking a month and just like being with your family and not worrying about all the stuff, everything will be there when you get back.
Right.
But being able to do that, I came back more energized and recharged, and I had time to read on the beach and like really think about what I was going to do and how I was going to put things into play. I think we need to do that more, and we're not great about doing that as a society. Americans, by and large, we work our tails off,
Yeah.
and it's to our own detriment most times. So can we create a structure where mini retirements are just a normal, natural thing that we do every single year? That's my second point.
I love it. So action, behavior, education is the
Yep,
first one, and then the second one is learn to take breaks, and you might actually be more successful when you take a break and step back and think about how do you really want to move forward, right? Instead of getting
totally.
caught up in the busyness. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Adam. Where would you like people to connect with you? Where's the best spot?
If you're intrigued at all about the shred method, the best place to go is theshredmethod.com. We have a master class that you can watch that basically tells you the ins and outs of how the business works. Um, and our team of coaches is more than willing to have a 20-minute call with folks and just say, let's run your numbers. Let's show you what's possible. And then strategize a little bit. We don't give away the sauce, but we'll show you kind of what's so and what's possible. And then if you're interested in hearing more about me and my, the things I do, adamcarroll.info is my website. It's two R's, two L's, adamcarroll.info.
Excellent. I will link all those resources in the show notes. Thank you so much again for coming on.
Right on. Thank you, TJ.
Take care.